Anyone who's listening to this, whatever the industry they're in, it's really, really important to stay grounded emotionally, mentally, spiritually to where you came from. I always call myself the simple boy from Mooney Ponds, just trying to get ahead in life. People always ask me, like, how did you win? One of the things I tried to master was if something didn't work out, you need to be smart around, like, what are you going to do to get yourself back on top? What do I need to do to be the best I can possibly be?
Welcome to the Magic Hour. Joining me today is co-host Ella Jenkins. Welcome, Ella.
Hello, thanks, Paul.
We've got another very special guest in the studio today. Joining us is Mr. Andrew Morello.
Great to be here, Paul. Finally got me here, hey?
Indeed,
yes,
indeed.
Yes.
Now, I always call you Andrew, but most people call you Morello. Is that right?
That is correct. That is correct. But as I did say, you can call me whatever you like as long as you call me.
Excellent,
Okay.
excellent. Look, we'd love to cover off a whole lot of different topics today, whether that's around, entrepreneurship, real estate, business, etc.
Yep.
But I always like to take people back to where it all started.
Yes.
And so would you like to give our listeners a bit of an overview of, your background, where you grew up, what you were originally doing and, where that's led you to today?
Yeah, great. Fantastic. So it was very nostalgic driving here today, driving up. So I flew in last night on the last flight from Sydney, and I went back to my mum and dad's old home in Mooney Ponds. My dad hasn't been well, so I'm staying with him. And I drove up Askervale Road and right down Moreland Road today to get here, which is great. It's great to be back in the hood. But it was funny because I actually drove past where it all began, which was the corner of Pascoe Road and Buckley Street, Mooney Ponds. My father had a service station there that a lot of people, especially if you're in this area, but I know you've got listeners all over the world, so I'll give them a bit more of a description. But this service station was there for literally since 1972, and then when my mum passed away, sadly, we ended up selling the building to a much larger group, the Sheehan family in Adelaide, which had been in service stations a long time. But they've knocked it down. They're rebuilding a new service station. I think it looks terrible. I'm happy to put that on record. It's badly laid out, especially growing up in service stations. But that corner of Pascoe Road and Buckley Street, Mooney Ponds, for anyone old enough, used to be an Amico. I don't think any of us here are old enough to remember Amico, but then it was a BP. And all of, I think, the values and the ethics and the morals I learned in business that transcended into my personal life actually came from growing up at 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, pumping petrol at my dad's service station, BP Morello Motors in Mooney Ponds. So, it's apt that you asked the question, because I think anyone who's listening to this, whatever the industry they're in, I know you've got, large following around, sort of innovation. But I think it doesn't matter, and I know you've got a science background, Ella, as well, and it's like, it doesn't matter what you eventually go into in life. I think it's really, really important to stay grounded emotionally, mentally, spiritually to where you came from, and understand that some of the good things that happened then transcend into the way you live your life now, and some of the bad things that happened then also. Like, my dad we were up at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning pumping petrol till 10 o'clock at night. I was 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. My mates were all spending their school holidays skateboarding and going to the pools, and I was working in 35-degree heat on the driveway, right? So at the time, I probably hated it, a lot of it. But in hindsight, I've taken a lot of those things and I've shared them with you, Paul, and your ventures and other people, that have gone through our entourage programs and stuff like that. So I pride myself on where I came from.
Absolutely.
My line, sorry, that I'm sure if anyone Googles me or looks at any of my past interviews or media or anything, I always call myself the simple boy from Mooney Ponds, just trying to get ahead in life. So there we go. So that's the background.
Fantastic. And so what did you do after that? Because I know you've got a long history in terms of business. Now,
yes.
Obviously, working at the service station, with your dad. As a teenager, what came next? What was next for you?
Yeah, I think you might have heard this story before, but it is a funny story. So my dad made a rule in our house where he said, as long as he's paying for things, you've got to sort of live by his rule. Not in a tyrant sort of a way, but he basically laid down the gauntlet to my brother, my sister, and I, and said, when you're independent and you're making your own money, you can do whatever you want. So I said, all right, no worries. So I was like 14, 15 years old. And I thought, how am I going to make money? I was working, $5-10 an hour at different part-time jobs. And then I saw that there was a real movement happening with drug and alcohol-free events. and none of them were run in the suburbs back then. They were only run in the CBD, and they were big and they were messy, and you can imagine all this testosterone, these 15-year-old boys. It caused a lot of problems. So I actually had an idea to take a local Moonee Ponds nightclub back then called One Bar. For anyone who's ever watched Underbelly Series 1, it used to be called Regine's and then the Cactus Club. I think there was a few ownership of some colourful characters over the years. But when I basically started a drug and alcohol-free event there, which was quite a process because in order to run them, you had to remove all the alcohol. So anyway, moral of the story is I went to my dad. I said, I'm going to start this business. And my dad, ironically, he didn't realise that it spurred me on, my mum and dad, because they would just, throw off these comments I'd make. I'm going to go start a business running nightclubs. And my dad would be like, no worries, no worries. So I did this little budget with a grey lead pencil on an exercise book. And I went to him, I need 10 grand to start this business, like $1,800 for security, $2,000 for back then. There was no social media. So we're handing out flyers at Essendon Station. And my dad said, well, I'm not going to give you the money. So I thought, shit, how am I going to sort that out, right? So I went to the Moonee Valley Council, and a lady that I'm still very close with, it was her birthday last week, so I'll give her a special mention. She's also the mother of some of my best friends as well, the Volpes. There's 4 brothers. I went to her and I said, look, I've built a little 2-page business plan. I think we can run these drug and alcohol-free events. And her name's Carol Espinoza. She worked at Moonee Valley Youth Services back then, and she gave me the money to start my first business. Wow. So pretty quickly after that, the first event we ran, I think we cleared about $18,000. And I was just like, I was 15. I remember coming home and I was in a shoebox full of 5, 10s and $20 notes. And my dad saw it and he's like, where'd you get that money from? As if like I'd done something wrong. And I'm like, I ran the event. And he goes, and how did you get the money home? And I said, I walked. And he goes, you walked through Moonee Ponds with a box full of cash? And I'm like, yeah. He goes, that's not happening anymore. Next time you call me, I come down, I'll pick up the cash and you and your mates can walk home. And so it was nice. It was a bit of a rite of passage. My father, he was cute about it all as well. Like he'd get the money home and he'd sorted out all the windows because obviously being in service stations, there was a lot of cash back then. So he'd tie, put lacquer bands around all the money, and then he'd be like, let's say there was 10 grand left after expenses, he'd get 5 and he'd give me the 5. Thank God he did this. And then he'd grab the other 5 and go and put it in the safe. He's like, you're not having the whole thing. And he was right, because I'd take that 5 grand and be gone in, I don't know, a week. Yeah. Like, I'd go say to all the boys, let's go party it up. So it was good parenting. And it had set me then on the trend. So I think, my cousin Anthony Morello still in the hospitality, food and beverage and event space in Sydney and in Melbourne, sorry. I did some in Sydney when I got there as well. But that sort of led the path into entrepreneurialism rather than going to get a job. Yep. And I'm sure you'll ask about the famous job in a little bit. That's the next part of it. And then, got into the real estate business with Jallis Craig. I was very good at listing and selling houses, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I did over 1,000 transactions and so forth.
I don't know if you remember telling me this story, but I do remember you telling me one story when you were in real estate and learning to auctioneer. And you might have been outside a train station in the western suburbs.
Newport train station across the road from the 24-hour RSL that's still there. My coach took me there to learn how to auction. The hardest crowd you're ever going to auction to, right? So they were hurling abuse at me and so forth. But my coach, I should probably mention all these important people. So Adrian Butero, who owns Compton and Green in Williamstown, he's still there. I've actually got dinner booked with him Wednesday. I did the Kokoda Trail with him. And he said, he'd get a little auction board. He said, auctioneering training, you got it made. Took me down to Newport train station in just next to Williamstown there. And I know the property has boomed there, but it's still quite a colourful little spot. Yeah. That little where the train station is and the 24-hour RSL and pokies and all that is. And it was probably a little bit embarrassing, but it was funny because what actually happened over like a 10-week period while we were training for the auctioneers championships, it's a thing, guys. People go, they have a championship for auctioneering. I said, yeah, they do. So the 10 weeks we were training, like the first week, everybody was hurling abuse. The second week, they lot less were. But by the third and fourth week, people were getting into it and like the traders would come out and say, auction off a coffee, I'd auction off a coffee. And then by like the 7th week, I think I took a week off. The 8th week I went down there and people were like, where were you last week? So there's an interesting story about that, isn't it, in life? Like, we're so worried about what other people think. But if we are prepared to put our egos aside and put our sort of inhibitions aside, it's amazing the things we can accomplish, which is really, really important.
How was that experience for you? Like when you first started, like, I know you as a very outgoing person, but how was that experience for you doing that? Was it confronting? Was it something you're like, yes, I want to do this? Like, how did you experience that?
You've hit the right word there. You've hit the right word on the nose there, that it was confronting, right? But once again, I was 18 years old. I was really just forging my career in business and in life, because I went on to do sort of auctioneer training for other people and speaking at a lot of big real estate events as well, which is good. And interestingly enough, it's like I look back upon periods like that and those times, and they really did formulate the character that I was. So like what if the question is, was I quiet before then or not confident? Then definitely not. I think I was very, very lucky. I grew up in a very supportive household. Both my mum, my dad, my brother was, successful. My sister was successful. And when I say successful, I'm not even just talking about financially successful. I'm also talking about my brother's very involved in community. My mum used to clean the church and clean, the church and do volunteer work with the local Italian community. So we were a home where everyone was doing things. So it wasn't like, yes, you can have that inhibition and you can say, okay, did it bring me out of my shell? Probably not out of my shell, but I had a really good baseline around like your job in life is to live life and to get involved and to do things and make yourself uncomfortable. And like, I've gone and done the Kokoda Trail in Papua New Guinea. I've been to Burning Man, like I've gone and done these things. People are like, oh, that's crazy stuff. And I'm like, it's not crazy if you're doing it with an intention that you want to grow off the back of it as well, which is good.
Absolutely.
How old were you when you started that first business with the...
I was 15. Yeah, 15, 16. I know. Yeah,
that's really young. And like, I feel like what stops a lot of people from going after starting their own business, especially when they're young, is the feeling that that's unachievable or out of reach or unrealistic, especially at a young age. How did you go through that process and have the confidence in yourself and your capability and the ability to go with a plan to people and say, I'm capable of seeing this through?
Yeah, great question. So once again, I was very lucky that my father never said no to anything. My mum and dad were always very supportive of my crazy ideas, which is good. So now that I'm a parent, I've got a 2.5, nearly 3-year-old son, Lion Main Morello, that's his name, on his birth certificate, LIONMAIN, as in Lion the Main Event Morello. So I've hopefully set him up for success there.
Love it.
But it's now that I'm a parent, I actually see the importance, and if there's any parents listening to this, the importance of fostering an environment of openness and trial and error. Like, I'm sure if I failed, my father would have said, good try. He's probably not, he's Sicilian, came here on a boat. So he's not the kind of guy who's going to be like, tell you I love you and I'm proud of you. But he'll probably say, you had to go and, pick yourself up and have a go again. So I was very lucky that I was in that fostered in that environment. But there were times like, it's funny when you do podcasts or when people Google always tells you about luckily for me, but it always tells you about the good stories, right? There's been plenty of stories in business and in property and in life where it didn't work out. Like, developments where you've lost $500,000 or like even right now with interest rates the way they are, like it's hard. Yeah. It's very, very hard. But so you can make a decision in life, your thought to your question around the thought process. It's like, I think, one of the things I tried to master was if something didn't work out, I was able to, it might, back in the day when I was a kid, it might have affected me for a week. Then when I got into business, it affected me for like 4 days. Then, when I got into real estate and you'd miss out on a listing or somebody, would take the listing off you. And then it's the worst. Like you'd have a listing for 3 months, you'd done all the work. And then someone and you've forged a relationship with them, then they'd take the listing off you, give it to another agent. And there was a classic joke that we make in the real estate where we say the first agent does the work, the second agent sells it, right? And it didn't happen often to me, but when it did, it affected me mentally, especially like that form of rejection and the fact that you've just worked your ass off for 3 months for these people. And you can be unconscious and go, oh, they're assholes and they're dogs for taking the property off you and it's not fair. Or you can say, oh, that's not fair, right? Or you can say, okay, it's a husband and wife. this is their biggest asset that they own. They're probably doing this because they need to sell either to pay off debt or because they want to send their kids to the private school because they didn't get a chance to. And as you start to mature and grow, that being affected mentally and emotionally, and that weight that you carry as somebody who's trying to do new things. As I said, it went from a week down to 4 days, 4 days to 3, 3 to 2, 2 to 1. And now it realistically like max a half a day for me. I generally go down to Bondi, go for a swim, hail, rain or shine. So even if it's raining and it's cold, I get in the water just to shock my system back into reality. Also to, be grateful. Like, you're sitting there at Bondi, you're looking out and you're like, wow, like there's war going on around the world right now. There's people that are dying of hunger. There's people in abusive family situations. And I'm sitting on the most famous beach in the world, just defragging, reading an article, listening to a podcast, maybe listening to the Magic Valley podcast.
Of course.
Of course.
Obviously.
So to the question, what's the process there? I think it's an evolving process, but I think it's really, really optimal and really, really important that you do have a way of not dealing with, not having the courage to have a go, but more having the courage and having a process to deal with the failure. Because I think that's the biggest thing that holds us back, right? So like whether you're 15, 16 or whether you're 50 starting a business or, getting married or having kids. Like I've got a friend of mine who's really successful in the business world and financially. And he was about to become a dad and he rings me and he's like, oh, where are you? And I said, I'm in the city office today. And he goes, can I come see you? And he came and saw me. And he's this guy who's extremely financially successful, great businessman, freaking out about becoming a dad, right? So I'm like, mate, I go, look, they've been doing it for tens of thousands of years. I've seen parents, mums give birth in like a Cambodian village and be out in the field, the next day. And I'm like, if they can do it in the middle of the jungle in Cambodia, we can do it in a private hospital in Melbourne or Sydney, right? So once again, your thought process, it's like, okay, put compare oranges to oranges, pears to pears, bananas to pineapples, and you go, okay, at the end of the day, everything's going to be okay. And if it's not okay, we're probably not at the end. Yeah.
That's amazing. Thanks for sharing that. I think a lot of that relates to resilience and building that up over time. And as you said, whether it's in business or, taking a risk or a chance on anything, and getting lots of no's and lots of rejections, but also having an outlet outside of work as well. As you said, go down, jump in the ocean, etc. Is there anything else that you have like outside of work that you have developed or rely on or enjoy or, helps you?
So I don't own a car, right? So and in Sydney, it's becoming more and more common not to own a car, but I haven't owned a car for a very long time. I moved from Bondi to Rose Bay next to the wharf there where Catalina's the restaurant is, and I started for the first time in my life catching the ferry, right? So I did a course in Vedic meditation, and I know a lot of people meet me and we meet me for the first time. Even Paul's seen the good, the bad, the ugly of Morello, but they're like, oh, Morello's always crazy. And I'm like, I'm actually not always crazy. So like when I get on the ferry, I listen to a lot of Ram Dass. You would have listened. You've listened to Ram Dass before?
No.
So Ram Dass, have you listened to Ram Dass before? So he's got a podcast. He's passed away now, but the podcast that his family have put together is called Here and Now. So it's on all your podcast places. And Ram Dass was a Harvard lecturer in a Jewish, conservative Jewish Harvard lecturer who, and I've got to tell people, if you're going to listen to it Here and Now, or you're going to read any of the Ram Dass stuff, you got to keep in mind he was around during the 70s, so sometimes he goes a little bit hard on the psychedelic stuff. But the whole story, if you go through the whole journey of Ram Dass, is then he went and spent a whole lot of time in India finding natural ways through like meditation, Vedic meditation, locking himself up in the, in an ashram for 3 months at a time and not speaking to anyone. And I'm not saying you got to go do anything as extreme as that, but you can take mini versions of it. So the 9-minute ferry from Rose Bay Wharf to Circular Quay, I'll put a bit of Ram Dass in, or just some meditation music, or in Vedic it's in silence. And I would just meditate, for that 9 minutes in, 9 minutes out. And it's like you've left the craziness of that is my son, Lion Mane Morello, and it's all in the name. So you left the craziness of that, and then you jump on this ferry, and it's just you're on the water, and even if it's raining, it's beautiful. And that Sydney Harbour, you just got this massive amount of gratitude. But trying to find like a little daily principle like that, the 9 minutes, everyone can afford 9 minutes. What's the saying that one of my coaches said to me? He said, Beyonce has the same amount of hours in a day that you do, Morello. And I said, that is a very good point. So if Beyonce can find time to exercise or meditate or read or whatever, then you can too. So just find that 9 minute period. Maybe it's on the bus, maybe it's on the train. Maybe it's, before you walk in the door, so you can be a present life partner, husband, wife, or parent. Maybe stop and, if you parked your car normally in the driveway at home, maybe park it down the end of the street and walk, 5 minutes back to your home. So that way by the time you're walking, you're not bringing all the drama, stress, and anger that has been the day that you've had and bringing that home to the loved ones. Or even if you are going to be home alone, it's probably even more important, because once you do get home, and if you are somebody who lives alone, you're stuck with your thoughts for the night. And then you talk to a lot of people. One of the hardest things that people are suffering from now is insomnia and not being able to sleep. And it's because their process for winding down hasn't actually been achieved. Like they're on Instagram at 11:30 at night, and they're watching TV at 11:30 at night, and then they expect their brain to just switch off and go to sleep and get quality sleep. So really important. Yeah. But check out Rum Dust. You'll like it. Get past the crazy stuff, the psychedelic stuff. It's actually really, really good. It's amazing how your perception of making something in life drastically changes when you change your environment and you're prepared to go on that journey.
100%.
I guess the importance of mindfulness is having that presence in day-to-day life, and that's what gives you the clarity to be able to be productive when you are working towards something as well. And having the ability to sit with gratitude and appreciate what you have going on, have a process to get over the letdowns and the difficulties that comes up. That's what allows you to then go and try the next new thing. 100%.
Yeah. How old are you now?
22.
22. Yeah. You're very mature for 22, I should
32.
say. Sorry, you're very mature for 22. But what I was going to say 30 is the growing that I think you do between 20 and 30 is massive. And that's why when you're between 20 and 30, like keeping in mind, and I'm not saying everybody needs to go get married or have kids or anything like that. There's no expectation on that. But once all those things do happen, whether it's marriage or kids or owning your own business, you sort of effectively, I don't want to use the word trap because I don't feel trapped, but you've got less time and less opportunity to go and find what's the thing that you're going to need to do to last through when those periods happen, right? So like, as soon as I saw my son, born, you have this automatic and I always forget the author's name, but I read it years ago. There's a book called Sapien. Have you read Sapien before?
No,
it's a really good book, Sapien, and it talks about the evolution of man, right? And he doesn't specifically talk about this example, but when he was talking about the evolution of man, and he talks about even in the modern world that we're in, our, amygdala and our, flight and flight responses, these are all things from the jungle, right? When we're running from a lion, right? So, and I run from a lion every day. He's just a child, right? So, but like the reality is, as soon as I saw my son born, and ironically, I actually delivered my son. It's a long story, but my brother got to deliver my first cousin by accident when he was 17 at my auntie's house. So in his school uniform. And so I said to the obstetrician, one thing my brother's got over me is that he delivered a baby. But the funny thing is, as soon as, they take him away, they clean him up, they bring him over to you holding him, automatically your prehistoric conditioning kicks in that you want to protect your son, right? You want to protect your child. And so you go, okay, well, we're not running from lions anymore, but, there's, obviously bad stuff that happens to kids and then, you want to be able to give them a good future. So like when you're having a bad day, often I do draw, and I don't want to make it, I'm sure there's plenty of people that are listening to this that don't have children, but you got to find that thing that when things get really tough that you can draw from. And for me, that's my son, right? So like, I go, okay, well, I've got to go make the magic happen. Pardon the pun, Magic Valley. But I've got to go make the magic happen, because if I don't, am I going to be able to give him and look, when I say give him the life that I want to give him, I'm not saying being able to send him to private school. I'm not saying being able to buy him a car when he turns 18. I'm saying more like, if you're so worried about getting your business right, you might miss some of those opportunities with your son, right? When I talk about providing for my son, I'm not saying to anyone listening to this, it's about being able to go drive a fancy car and send them to a fancy private school. It's being able to be present, right? Because my dad worked 7 days a week, and that's all he knew. So, yeah.
I know you're very structured with managing your time, and I know you get a lot of things done. And I know from previous conversations we've had, particularly when I think you're in real estate, in terms of structuring your days. Yes. How do you go about, or how would you advise, people that are in business, for example, how to structure their days and get the most out of their days to maximise the time that they have with their business, with their family, with whatever it is that they want to do?
Yeah, fantastic. So one of my coaches was a guy named John McGrath in Sydney. If anyone's in any form of property in Australia, they'll know who he is. He's one of the most famous people in real estate and property internationally as well. And he's a great guy. And so one of the things he taught with me was this thing called the ideal week. And so the whole point of the ideal week is to map out what is the time for doing emails, because human nature is we're very reactionary. And let's start with the basic stuff. So returning emails, don't do it reactively. It's a crazy thing. People, if they're sending you an email, they don't expect a response immediately. That's the reality, right? If it was they needed an immediate response, they will pick up the phone and call you. People are like, oh, it's not the same in my industry. I said, it is the same in your industry. If there is an email, if there is, say, a prime example is, let's say you're in a business where you have an inquiries page and you do get a lot of inquiries through online, then don't make it your personal email. Make it an inquiries at theentourage.com.au. Make it inquiries at Jallis Craig, innernorthwest.com.au, whatever it might be. So that way, that email, yes, is always being serviced by someone. And here's the other big news I tell people: remove your ego. You don't necessarily have to be the person responding to those, right? With the help now of AI, we're running a function tomorrow for the Entourage and potential Entourage members around AI integration into your business, right? But half this AI stuff now, people aren't even going to be able to tell the difference, right? If it's a standard question, or if you've got an e-commerce business, 9 times out of 10, the question that they're asking has been asked before. So if you want to build a really good system, every time someone asks a question, put it into either your AI or put it into your frequently asked questions profile. So that way, if that question gets asked again, it triggers a thing. It gives them a basic response and says, one of our team will be in touch shortly. And whether that's you in an hour's time or whether that's a staff member that returns that sort of stuff, the ideal week, if you can master it, will provide you more mental, physical, and emotional space to then do more things, right? Which is, really big. I've got, in my phone there's a couple of opportunities that have come through this morning, and I've just said I'll get back to you this afternoon when I finish doing this podcast, because I didn't want to fill my brain up with a whole bunch of things that were going to detract from me being the best person I can possibly be while sitting in this room with you.
Mm-hmm. How did you develop that discipline? Is it having the focus on, your mission or what's important to you in life? How can people develop that discipline? Because I know a lot of people struggle with that. They struggle with, blocking out time in their calendar for personal things or family things, or they get too focused on business and it's only business. Do you have any tips around that?
So I'm going to give you the fun story, and then I'll give you the proper answer to it. So the fun story is, I shared a room, and hopefully my brother listens to this. I know some people have heard this story. I shared a room with my brother my whole life, right? And so my brother used to get up every morning at 4:30 a.m. in the morning. We shared a room, I was a kid, and I was like, turn off the light, and he had the radio going. He'd be getting himself pumped up for the day ahead. He was part of this thing called the 5 a.m. club, right? So you had to be ready to go and take on the world at 5 a.m. And my brother would re-record his voicemail every morning. Hello, and thank you for contacting John Morello on, what day is it today? Monday, the 27th of November, 2023. I do appreciate your call, but I'm in a series of opens and auctions and inspections today. I do appreciate your call, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. But he'd re-record it, and people go to me, does your brother re-record that every day? And I'm like, he does, right? And next to me while I'm trying to sleep at 4 o'clock in the morning. So, it was, and so, look, I hated him for it at the time, but seeing the discipline he had in doing, he doesn't do it anymore, but he did do it literally for 20 years, and people go, okay, there's, what do they say? Success leaves hints, right? So my brother doing that every morning and having that discipline got me to have a discipline around my work ethic and getting things done.
Just jumping in there, how did your brother develop that then? Did that come from your dad? Like, where did that come from him?
It's a really, really good question there. So my dad had really good, he was probably too far on the business side. Yeah. So he had really good work ethic. Yeah. So he definitely planted the seed for us on work ethic, right? Which is obviously a big part of it. So, but he did work 7 days a week. So I think, begrudgingly, I've said to my dad many times, you've taught me what to do and what not to do. In his head, he was doing what I said now about my son. He was trying to protect us and give us a better future, and he'd come from a tough background. So certainly the father into the son, and my sister's got the same work ethic, by the way, so it's not a male thing, it's a human being thing. So my sister should see the things that she gets done in a day. She's the GM of the Jellis Craig Foundation. She's raised over $4 million for charity. She's also a mum. She's also got other philanthropic and business, ventures and activities. So, she gets a lot done too. But one of the big things my brother did do, and I'm giving a lot of plugs to a lot of other people today, but it's one of the things, I never did it, but there's a guy, Dr. Fred Gross, Grosse, and he had a coaching program, which was so they would basically, back then there was no Zoom. So what everyone would do is they'd log on for a group call, right? It was the first of its technology. So everyone would ring from around the world. This one was the Australian one. So it was whatever time there, maybe 2 o'clock in the afternoon in the US. But you'd call, and Dr. Fred Gross, he'd be on the other end of the line, and he'd go, okay, guys, and give him like a 5 minute, bit of power right now. What does that look like in the modern world? You don't need to be signing up for a $30,000 Dr. Fred Gross program. What you can do is just have the discipline to listen to a particular podcast every morning, or choose one piece of mental nourishment that you can get, or read a passage from a book, or not that I'm religious, but some people, if you're religious, maybe it's reading whatever your religious scripture is. If that's I know some very successful people that do that, right? And I even tried it for a while. I grew up in a Catholic home, but as I said, I'm not really religious anymore. I'm more spiritual now. But I remember listening to them and them telling me that every morning they open the Bible at some spot and they just get their finger and they read a passage, right? I'm like, oh, great. Why don't I try that? I tried it. It didn't really overly do a lot for me. I thought, well, look, the concept of opening a book and pointing at a particular spot in the page and reading it is a great idea. So then what I did is I started buying lots of great books. The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. I bought Donald Trump's book. Right? I remember opening one day, I just needed a little bit of nourishment, and I was having a bit of a tough week, and I opened the book, and I just closed my eyes and I stuck my finger on the page, and it was a quote from Donald Trump that says, just because you deserve something, nobody's going to give it to you on a silver platter. And I was like, fuck. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but Donald I was like, Trump. Yeah, Donald Trump.
That's ironic.
There we go. I know, right? I know, but he did. But it was the one thing that I needed for the week that I was having, right? Yeah. So it's like what I said about, but if you look at my bookshelf, there's everything from, as I said, guys that have, gone off to the jungle and done ayahuasca ceremonies and talked about stuff like that versus, I've got Losing Your Virginity with, Richard Branson. I've got Donald Trump up there. I've got John McGrath's 2 books, right? So tying it all the way back, I think, yes, being able to have good role models as an example. Yes, my dad, my brother, my sister, then obviously I would, the concept's called learning via osmosis, right? So I certainly learned a lot of it via osmosis. But if you don't have all that, don't use it as an excuse. Find good things. So go and read. So John McGrath didn't come from a background like I came from, and he's far more successful than me, not just financially, but also, just successful as a human being. He does so much in his day. And so what he did is he made a decision and drew a line in the sand to implement some of these things, whether it's the ideal week, whether it's daily meditation, whether it's reading a particular book. Just start with something small. And then I think, the structure of your life will actually start to evolve and everything as well. Right.
Yeah, I think having mentors is super important. And that's something we've talked to a lot of other guests on the show about. And it's interesting to hear everyone's different perspectives on it. I think if you do want to grow, you have to aspire to match up to the people who inspire you. And also there's almost a healthy sense of competition that comes from looking at someone and wanting to lift yourself up to that standard.
Correct.
Going back to your kind of path into business,
Yes.
I want to hear this story about the Apprentice.
Yes, okay. Well, it's quite apt when you talk about that.
Speaking of competition,
correct,
what was
correct.
that like?
One, speaking about competition. Two, speaking about mentorship. So, as I said, I was extremely lucky. I've been surrounded by amazing business operators, and then they're great human beings as well. And Mark Boris was certainly one of those. So, Spiro Vassiliadis said to me, "You should try out for the Apprentice." They had like 10,000 applicants in Australia. Then I made sort of the top 100 in Victoria. Then I made the top 100 in Australia. Then I ended up making the top 12 on the show. And it is interesting though when we talk about competition, because one of the reasons why people always ask me, like, how did you win? Especially when I go do like sales training for real estate companies, and all the, testosterone, egotistical filled men are at the front. They've got their notepad out there. Like, so how did you beat everyone? And I try and just tone it back for a minute. I go, let's pause for a minute, guys, and go, I think one of the reasons why I did win was I removed the element of competition, right? So I went to myself, what do I need to do to be the best I can possibly be? So in that book I mentioned before, The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, one of the agreements is always do your best. One of the other agreements is don't take things personally, right? So it's like, if I went on that show, I didn't go there to win the Apprentice. I went on there to challenge myself to be the best I could possibly be and put my best forward, right? And I'd already started on my spiritual journey when I was 23/24 when I went on the show. So like I was doing, obviously, you're 22, you're going through that journey yourself now. You're sitting down with people at this table, you're asking them great questions, you're doing research, right? So I think you're doing all those right things. There's a whole bunch of 22-year-olds that aren't doing those things, right? So like you want to look at the difference between you and what you'll achieve over the next 10 years versus some other people, you will see a fundamental difference, right? And so when I won the show, it was a great testament to, I think, all the things that my father and my brother and my mother and my sister had taught me, which was great, number one. Number two, it was testament to the mentors I had, e.g. the Adrian Buteras getting me to go stand at Newport train station and call auctions, right? So like they were all extremely proud to see that I had accomplished it. So interestingly enough, I actually forewent a large portion of my $250,000 winnings because I had a business already and I'd done reasonably well up to that point in my life financially. And I said, I want to actually take shares in the business. Now, what was I doing there, right? So a lot of people... a lot of time I haven't actually gone into the intricacies of it, but what I was doing was buying proximity, right? So I was buying a mentor. So whether or not the business was going to be successful or not, I knew by tying my money up in with Mark Burris and becoming effectively a business partner of Mark Burris means that I could have access to him for life. So like, we go on now, 12, 13 years later, I'm still mates with him. I'm still a shareholder in the company. I still own a couple of franchises. I'm still involved in the business, and I've also got access to him. So whenever I've got a question about something, I can drop him a text, I can call him. His office is literally right next to my entourage office, so I can literally walk one block and we can go have a coffee together at Adora Chocolates and have a quick coffee and pick his brain on something. So you don't need Mark Burris. I just want to bring it back to, to that way it's relatable for everyone. But go and find the person like Ella mentioned before. You've got your science degree, and you're like, oh, I didn't have lab experience. Well, what a great opportunity to go and attach myself to Paul and Magic Valley and the team, so that way I could get the experience. That's the goal, right? So that is the goal. But you shouldn't be ashamed of that, and you should feel great about that, because there's a whole bunch of 22-year-olds not doing anything. And they sit there and then they'll complain that, oh, why haven't I been given opportunities? And like tomorrow, Paul might say, Ella, no, see you later. Thanks very much. Appreciate the work you've done for us thus far. See you later. And you may not get that opportunity, but the difference is then do you stop at Paul or do you find another Paul? Like, don't give up straight away and go, okay, but this is the thing. We've created a culture where, it's become a little bit too easy for people. And so when they do get hit with a bit of a roadblock, they take it as a definitive no. I'm like, oh, I don't think you should. And I know people that do that to me. Like they chase me down. And like I got a guy who whenever he's in Sydney, he's like, I'm in Sydney on these dates. And like he doesn't pay me anything. He doesn't, he's not involved in any of my businesses, but he just hunts me down and he's a nice guy. And he just goes, I just want to buy you a salad. I just want to buy you lunch. I just want to buy you a drink. I just want to buy you a coffee. And I'm like, mate, you want to buy me a couple of whiskeys and take me for lunch, mate, I'm happy to sit down with you for an hour and give you my advice, right? So I think at the end of the day, you don't need a Mark Bouris or a John McGrath or a Jerry Harvey. It could be somebody that's in your sphere, somebody that's in your industry that you're interested in. And it might be somebody like, one of the other things is people always go to me, who were your mentors growing up? My mother was a mentor for me. Like, she wasn't a businesswoman. She had a terrible childhood, but I saw the way she gave so much back to the community. And I look at the way my son is, and he never got to meet my mother. And like, whether you believe in this sort of shit or not, I think there's very much my mother's spirit in my son. Like when we finish dinner in Sydney, like we'll be at a nice restaurant in Sydney, we might be walking to the ferry to catch the ferry home, and we've packed up food. My son's 2.5, about to turn 3, and he'll take the food we've packed up at 2.5, nearly 3, and he'll go up to a homeless person, sit with them, right? Not just give them the food, he'll sit down with them. That was my mum right there. My mum taught me that stuff. Like most parents in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, like they wouldn't let their kids go anywhere near a homeless person, or they wouldn't let their kids play in the mud or run around in the rain. Like, one day I just bought him this whole new outfit from Seed, and it was, I love dressing him in pink because it's one of my favorite colors. And I dressed him in this full outfit in pink. We went to the park and it had been raining the day before. Somehow this kid can find mud anywhere. All the concrete in the world, but he can find mud. So he finds this one little pool of mud, and then like it starts with just his pants getting dirty. Then before you know it, it's the t-shirt. Then before you know it, he's gone and got mud and just covered his face, his hair, everything. And like these people, where we were playing is like the thoroughfare for all the people doing their walks in eastern suburbs Sydney and their Lorna Jane and all that jazz, or their PE Nation. And so these women would walk past, obviously other mothers, and it was probably a 50-50 divide. 50% of them were looking at me in disgust that I was letting my son do that. And 50% were like, oh my God, it's so good that you're letting him do that, because parents don't let their kids play in mud anymore. It's like if you wrap someone up in cotton wool and then eventually they break out of the cotton wool, they're not gonna respond well to it. Like our son's never sick, touch wood, but he's never sick. Like a little sniffle here and there. But because like we get him out in the ocean, we get him out in the forest, we get him out in the mud, like he's always in nature and he's not sitting there looking at a screen 24/7 like most kids are, right? So like that's the sort of trade-off. Yeah. So Ella, the moral of the story was, if you get a no, just keep going back.
Yeah.
All right. Don't take no for an answer, Ella.
Agree.
Don't take no for an answer.
I 100% think that's so important, and resilience is such a skill, not even throughout life, but in any certain circumstance, day to day, throughout just one day. And those skills are really important, and it is really important that we encourage that kind of confidence to have a go in the next generation as well, in ways like that, just allowing for this sense of freedom. You don't have to follow the most common path to get to where you want to go.
Correct.
There's lots of different ways of getting where you're going. And something we talk about a lot is we talk a lot about like animal welfare, environmental issues, population issues, all these issues that are coming up in our future very soon. We're going to see the manifestation of them if we aren't already.
Yep.
These are problems that can be solved by that kind of creativity and innovation and confidence. Correct. And it's really important to encourage that in anyone in the next generation, especially the people who have, that passion and that moral kind of standard that they want to do something to make an impact. 100%, yeah.
Well, interesting for you, and as a student of science, you'll be intrigued by this. And it's literally, I was listening to on the ABC News before. A study actually came out today that Australia is so badly ranked when it comes to the high schools and primary schools are so badly ranked globally when it comes to the education around the sciences, right? So like we look at Australia and we see ourselves as these, Paul, you guys at Magic Valley are a prime example of that, right? Around the innovation that's coming out of Australia. But like it's really, really important for us to really review this next generation and what they're being exposed to. And is it good enough? Is it keeping up to scratch? If Australia wants to still be seen as a hub for innovation and foster an environment for young Australians to actually feel like, yes, I can have a crack and do something, then we need to move with the times and we need to grow. But also individuals need to also take responsibility for their growth as well.
I think, as Ella mentioned, change really needs to come from people. And I think, a lot of that comes through business as well. And we've also spoken a lot about mentors as well. It's been a common theme through today's podcast.
Yep.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the entourage and having mentors yourself? Probably before then.
Yes.
Was that one of the motivators for you to be able to give back and provide mentorship and training, particularly with people in business?
Yes.
And I know I'll just relay, a personal story.
Please.
I had a corporate career, I'm working at NAB and ANZ, and, I wanted to open the gym, I've been around gyms for 30 years at that point. I know everything about gyms, or so I thought, right? Yeah. I manage a team at, ANZ, I'm good with people, I can run a gym. Well, of course I can run a gym.
It's easy.
Yeah. Anyone could do it. I take one step in and I've got absolutely no idea what I'm doing. Never done sales in my life, never done marketing in my life. I've got all these, people management that I need to do. I don't know anything about commercial contracts. What do I know about a commercial? I had absolutely no idea, right? And I laugh every time I hear people that have never run a business.
That must be easy.
Exactly, and also try and tell you how to do everything as well, right?
Everyone's got an opinion.
Exactly. So, would you like to talk a little bit about the entourage and what you do there and how that sort of came about?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Paul. And obviously we've appreciated, Paul's. We're so proud that we've gone on the journey with Paul when it was the gym and then into your finance business and now with Magic Valley as well. We're so glad to be a part of that journey with you because that's what it's all about, right? So a little bit of background for those who don't know, our founder, Jack Delosa, BRW Young Rich Lister, but really, really good guy, one of my best mates. We've been all over the world together. He's like a mini Mark Bouris, in my opinion, right? It's like Mark had this laser focus and discipline to the point where sometimes it was probably a little bit too much, as in like Mark would get something in his head and then that was it. Like for the next 2 weeks, this is what everyone's doing, right? And so Jack's often the same. Like when he just wrote his last book, Elevates, he's had 3 bestsellers. He actually locked himself away for like a month. And I still remember I got the text. It was like a Thursday night at like 1 a.m. and he's just gone, I've just finished. What are you doing tomorrow? Because I need to do something, right? So he's still a human being, which is good to know. But the entourage has been around nearly 14 years now. We help 6-figure businesses go to 7 figures, 7 figures to 8. And now we've got our first batch of 8-figure businesses that we've helped go to 9, which is really, really good. And ironically, quite a number of those, look, we've got, let's call it half a dozen to a dozen 9-figure businesses. And I think about a half a dozen of them are based in Melbourne. So you talk about, if you're from Melbourne and you're listening to this, you're like, oh, but, am I around the right people? I'm like, mate, we got an event on Thursday night. I know some people going to that now, which is great. So it's like, there's plenty of great events in Melbourne. You don't need to have Mark Bouris or Jerry Harvey or Jack Delosa, right? You don't need them to be able to talk to them every single day. But one of the big fundamental things I will speak about, so basically, we have programs that sort of go over a 12-month period and we cover off on what we call the 6 elements. So marketing, strategy, sales, product and service, operations, finance, and people and culture. And the whole idea of it is actually to help you be a better human being. So what does that mean? It means taking you out of being a technician, move you into a manager into a leader into entrepreneur. And this misconception that people have, like an entrepreneur goes and sits on a beach in Bali for 9 months of the year. And I'm like, Mark Bouris definitely doesn't do that. John McGrath definitely doesn't do that. Jack Delosa definitely doesn't do that. I definitely don't do that, right? So being an entrepreneur is allowing you to free you up from that technician work and the manager work and the leader work to actually be the visionary to push your industry forward through innovation, push your business forward through innovation, and then give your contribution back, right? So like, Paul, you and Andrew and the team at Magic Valley have got this mate, like, and it's all good and well to have good intentions, right? So we're gonna come up with cultivated meat. We're gonna be one of the world leaders. We're gonna do this. We're gonna do that. But it's still going to be sustainable at the end of the day, right? So it's like, but the more sustainable it is, the more Ellas you could potentially hire, more 22-year-olds that are excited about life, that are, that actually want to give back to their, when I met your whole team, like there's some of them there that I'm sure could go get paid a lot more money doing a lot of other things because with their, extremely experienced science backgrounds, but they're inspired and motivated by it. So that's the visionary's job. That's the entrepreneur's job, to create an environment that for people to get inspired and motivated. So it's effectively that's the one glass of wine version, I call it at the entourage. If you want to have the bottle of wine version, call me. So there we go. So, but we're very, very excited. We've got members in 11 countries now. There is something for everyone. As I said, we're running an event tomorrow, so we run localized state-by-state events. Everything can be done on Zoom these days. As I said, we've got members in 11 countries, so they're not sort of flying into our head office in Sydney. We've got 72 full-time staff. We're across 2 floors at level 6 and 7 at 60 Pitt Street in Sydney CBD. Follow me on Instagram at Andrew Morello. Check out what we do. If you want to have a chat, I think there's a link on the top of my bio. Either myself or one of the team can have a chat with you. Even if you're just starting out, no worries. But certainly if you're in a business right now and you're doing 6, 7, or 8 figures, but you're not seeing your wife or your husband or your life partner or your children, this is something you should look at. And it's interesting. Like, it's funny, like we talked about mentors and coaches and things of that nature. I got the most out of the relationship with John McGrath when I was paying like $3-4 grand a day to go and spend time with John McGrath. And I used to very luckily included in that get to spend time with a guy named Scott Kennedy Green, who was one of the best auctioneers in the world as well. He won the Australasians a number of times. So John would spend the day with me, and then he'd give me as a little bit of a bonus to go and spend a couple of hours with Scott Kennedy Green to refine my auctioneering. But it was interesting when and coming from, being quite a fitness person yourself, like it's interesting when you hire a personal trainer and you're paying out of your back pocket, you make sure you get a result versus like, if it's a cold, rainy Melbourne night, and you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to go for a run tonight. Then you get home from the office at 7:30, 8 o'clock. You have some, food, some rice and vegetables or whatever, and then you look outside and it's bucketing down rain. Do you go for that run? No, you don't, because you didn't pay for it, right? So I'm a big believer you don't need to go crazy, but getting good advice isn't that expensive if you're implementing that advice and 2xing, 3xing, 4xing your business because of that. And I think, interestingly enough, like I see the journey with people at the Entourage, they go, oh, when I started the program, I thought it was going to be more work. And they're like, get 6 months down the line, they're like, I'm working less, but I'm making more money. How's this possible? I said, well, how it's possible is we've shifted you from technician mode into manager, and now we're probably 6 to 8 months in, you're probably starting to go from a bit of manager into leader. And I said, the goal is over the next 12, 24, 36 months is to get you spending majority of your time in entrepreneur mode. Does it mean you still might go and, like, let's say you do have a science background and you do create an innovative business like Magic Valley. Does it mean that you're not going to get in the lab 10% of the time? No, like, you should want to still get in the lab. Henry Ford, whether you like him or not, obviously I know he's controversial, but Henry Ford, he in the books that he reads and that he wrote, when you read them and the literature about him, he says the best memories he has of that business was being on the floor with the mechanics building something, right? That's his best memory, not owning, being the richest man in the world, not the power that it gave him, not probably some of the bad things he did also, but the best, like the most purest period of his life was still spending 10% of his time. They would black out all the windows so competitors couldn't see what they're doing, and sitting on the floor, and they'd sleep on the factory floor for months at a time. He'd say to them, tell your wives, back then it was all men obviously, but he'd say, tell your wives you're not coming home for the next 2 weeks, but Henry Ford himself was going to sleep on a mattress on the floor of the factory as well. So there's nothing wrong with still enjoying the technical work, but if you want to have a fulfilled life, and if you want to have a nourished life and you don't want to wake up one day, like my dad at 75, your wife passed away and you're saddened by the fact that you never got to drive you and your wife across. Like, my parents would always talk about driving across the Nullarbor. They never did it. And that's very sad for me. So I've made my mission in life that Andrew Morello wants to make lots and lots of money, to pay other people really, really well, to do things he doesn't want to do, so he can do more things he loves doing with the people that he loves.
Yeah. Makes sense. I feel like we could talk for hours and hours and hours. One last question that I have before we finish up, and thank you so much for your time today. As you said, we've covered so many different topics. You have tried our cultivated pork product. What were your thoughts beforehand? Like, what were you expecting, and what was it like? Well,
look, I'm a pretty open-minded person, but certainly there was an element of apprehension, right? And I know when you and I have done coaching sessions and had conversations around, like, there's an education piece, right? That's a massive, and this is what this podcast is also about. Like, we haven't spoke about cultivated meat as that much, but it is an education piece in general about educating people around sort of the morals and the ethics of what cultivated meat can do, but then obviously the process of it as well, right? Which is good. And you're getting lots of great exposure. You should be very, very proud. And you're one of the ward leaders. Magic Valley is one of the ward leaders in it, which is fantastic. So there was a little bit of apprehension there, but love the dumplings. I was a big fan of those. I know then what else do we have at the office? We had the dumplings, and then we had when you came up to Sydney.
Yes, the lamb cigars we had in Sydney.
Yes, they were great as well. So look, I think the journey that Magic Valley's on it's inevitable, right? Like the reality is, as you and I have spoken many times in the past, and some of your other guests that I've listened to the podcast have spoken about, like the world is not going to be able to sustain feeding the billions of people the way we're doing it now. So, Ella, you said before, like it's a matter of, people embracing change and embracing the uncertainty of it. But certainly I've had a lot of joy and probably out of all the things I'm involved in, more people have brought up Magic Valley with me than anything else because they're like so interested in it, right? Which is good. And I've been involved with some of the vegan food production businesses, and I think just food technology in general, where we are today to where we're going to be in 10 years' time is just, I reckon, going to 100x, right? Like that's the reality. And I think, anyone who's listening, they're like, they want to know more about it, do your research. Like the great thing about you, Paul, and I know Andrew is as well, and then your whole team, everyone's really open. Everyone's happy to have a chat. So like, you don't know where your journey is going to go on. I know that we did an event in Sydney together, and we got another one on Thursday night together, and it's like people are interested and they want to have a conversation. So like if you're somebody that's got a little bit of interest in it and you're not sure, start to reach out or start to read or start to listen to this podcast or some, other literature and educate yourself around it. And then I think the last time we spoke, realistic production, the commercial production was sort of 6, 12, 18 months away. Yeah. So we look at that and go, okay, by the time it is something that is on the market and accessible, like if you're walking through your IGA or you're in a restaurant and they say this is cultivated meat, try it. Like at the end of the day, more is lost with indecision than wrong decision. Embrace the uncertainty of life, practice present moment awareness, and make sure you live the dream.
Amazing. I think that's a great place to wrap things up today.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much for your time. As you mentioned, yes, look, if anyone wants any more info, they can reach out to us and everyone knows where to find us at magicvalley.com.au. Andrew, where's the best place to find you?
Yep. So I'm fairly active on Instagram, which is good. And as I mentioned, if you go to @Andrew Morello in my bio, I'm 90% sure if it's not there right now, that there is a link that you can click on and you'll speak to either myself or one of the team. That's probably the best way. Otherwise, feel free to check out, obviously, the Entourage website, theentourage.com, and have a look at that stuff there. But we've got a 1300 number. It's on the website. If you want to call them, ask to speak to me, I'm sure we can organise something.
Amazing. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks very much, Ella. Thanks, Paul. It's been great to be here.
Thanks, mate.
Great.
Thanks.